Jonathan, good evening, sir.
How are you doing?
Excellent. Thanks for coming on the program tonight. Appreciate it.
Of course, of course.
So you were at the hearing today, right?
I was there, yes.
What did you make overall of everything you heard there?
Well, I think you had it right in the intro. Wow, Daryl Issa just gave it to that guy, this DOJ official. This man who was there, by the way, it's actually formerly Harry Reid's top lawyer is this DOJ official that was testifying. And he had nothing to say. And, a lot of the Republican members were trying to understand how he could have issued blanket denials in the first place. And then now we have all these facts that show that what they were denying is in fact true. So I'm wondering myself if they lied or if it was just a Clintonian maneuver with legalese to get around what the clear truth was here.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about the lies, what specifically are you talking about? Because this is the second time that Ronald Weiss has gone before the Oversight Committee, right?
Right.
And what he said last time contradicts the testimony of some of the ATF agents who testified today?
Right. Yeah, so it starts with there's a February 4th letter from him. And this is like the key. It's like early on in the process, and they're just getting into this investigation. He says in this letter that it's not true. They never allowed the guns to go into Mexico. They never knowingly allowed these weapons to go into the criminal networks, into the hands of the Mexican drug cartels. And lo and behold, today in the hearing, we had 4 ATF agents in the hearing saying that that is exactly what they were instructed to do by their higher-ups. And in the middle of the hearing, Daryl Issa actually provided emails showing that the number 1 and number 2 officials at ATF were briefed weekly on this program.
Weekly. Yeah, and even more, from what I understand, I guess there was an email that was presented today, a response to the acting ATF director, Ken Melson, who had asked for additional details about Operation Fast and Furious, and had even asked for the IP address of one of the surveillance cameras so that he could, I guess, log on from his computer at work and watch the surveillance footage in real time.
It's really amazing that you have such intimate involvement. Here you have the acting director of ATF watching the operation happen on his computer in D.C., and when congressional investigators come looking for what happened, they act like they have no idea.
Yeah.
And
no, he was just watching
so
YouTube.
bad.
It was David After Dentist, I swear. Yeah, I know. And Jonathan, this is where we get to the story that just came out on dailycaller.com a short time ago. Then you have the reaction of some lawmakers and gun control advocates who say, well, what this really shows is that we need more gun laws here. I don't know how on earth. I mean, this investigation is about the fact that the government allowed the laws to be broken, and their response is, well, clearly this shows we need more laws.
Oh, what is it? I mean, Democrats, Democrats, whatever, you agree with them or you disagree with them. But one fault I think you could say is that whenever the failure is that a law isn't being enforced, their first inclination is to always think you need a new law instead of thinking maybe we ought to enforce the law that's on the books.
Yeah, and look, I mean, here's the thing. You could have a gajillion laws governing gun ownership, but if the ATF is going to allow criminals to circumvent those laws and not go after them, well, we're going to keep having hearings to do with things like Operation Fast and Furious.
Right. And just to explain to listeners what exactly was happening. So these ATF agents, they basically have to try to find where the guns are being purchased for these drug cartels. So they'll watch the purchases. And for instance, if you have, say, a 22-year-old woman who has a beat-up car and she walks into a gun store and purchases $10,000 worth of AK-47,
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of scenario that they're talking about. You kind of know, okay, that she's not likely purchasing these AK-47s for her own personal use. And so they'll investigate that purchase and see if it's on behalf of a criminal network. And then if it is, then they'll seize the weapons. what they were instructed to do is just ignore those and just surveil them and not intercept any of the weapons as they were en route to the criminal networks.
Yeah, and it sounds like in some cases, the surveillance really was cursory, if that. I mean, there was testimony from Olindo James Casa, who's one of the ATF agents, and he said, what I found concerning and alarming was more times than not, no law enforcement activity was planned to stop these suspected straw purchasers from purchasing firearms. The only law enforcement activity that was occasionally taken was to conduct a surveillance of the transaction and nothing more. Most of the time, the firearm purchase forms and receipts for those transactions were faxed to our office and group members, and we were supposed to write reports of investigations detailing the purchase of firearms by those aforementioned individuals. But that was where it stopped. I mean, once the paperwork had been completed, that's where the investigation stopped.
Now, the interesting thing is that in one instance, they actually were witnessing the transfer of a trunk full of assault guns from one car to the other. And their higher-ups told them, you need to follow the car that initially had the guns back home and not follow the guns in the new car, which doesn't make any sense. Now, there's one actual theory that was suggested by Daryl Issa during the hearing, and actually some readers have been emailing me that maybe this is why, that in allowing all these guns to go to Mexico, you potentially, the Obama administration could then demonstrate that this is a problem and then there's a need for new laws or something like that. That would be really dastardly. I have no evidence that's the case, but you start to wonder when there's so much crazy stuff going on.
Well, I mean, you can't help but wonder. Again, one of the other quotes from one of the other ATF agents who testified today, John Dodson, he made the statement that he said, my supervisors directed me and my colleagues not to make any stop or arrest, but rather to keep the straw purchaser under surveillance while allowing the guns to walk. Surveillance operations like this were the rule, not the exception. This was not a matter of some weapons getting away from us or allowing a few to walk so as to follow them to a much larger, more significant target, allowing loads of weapons that we knew to be destined for criminals. This was the plan. It was so mandated. And he went on to say, I have never heard an explanation from anyone involved in Operation Fast and Furious that I believe would justify what we did. So, in other words, the motivation for this does still remain a question. And so you're going to have theories like this. I mean, look, this is the administration of Rahm, never let a crisis go to waste, Emmanuel.
Right.
So that's one step from never letting a crisis go to waste. You can probably find, let's create a crisis that we won't let go to waste.
I mean, the assumption is that there was some kind of plan here. And when it's baffling, not from the outside, it's baffling to people from the inside.
Right.
Who were actually, the law enforcement agents involved here.
Yeah.
So you start to think a little bit outside the box, and that's the question that I have as a reporter: is what in the world was the plan? That's what we need to find out.
One of the things that I'm going to do, Jonathan, and I have not had time to do this today, but I want to go and I want to look at some of these emails, the dates on some of these emails that were released today, and go back and look at what was the administration saying about the Second Amendment and about gun issues during the same time period. We know that President Obama had an op-ed. We know that Eric Holder called for a reinstatement of the semi-auto ban. There were a lot of these little digs at gun owners and our gun laws, and Mexico was the crux of the argument while this was taking place. But I think it'll be fascinating to see how some of these dates match up within the Fast and Furious investigation and then what we were seeing from the administration. So I think there are many more stories yet to be written. I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight and look forward to doing this again soon.
Absolutely.